You're listening to The World at 8 with Lynn Mozart. The World at 8, the number one in nationalist news.
Highlights of the news today, Wednesday the 2nd of April 2014. David Cameron orders review of Muslim Brotherhood. British leaders praise British Muslim achievements. 400,000 migrants on taxpayer-funded benefits. No wonder they flock to Britain. Austen Davies discombobulated. NATO to beef up defences in Eastern Europe. Ukraine crisis. Poland asks NATO to station 10,000 troops in its territory. Denmark. Muslim gang attacks police in Muslim-dominated area. More than 40% of Italians want to quit Euro. US labels Hamza a terrorist leader of global's reach. Thought for the day, let loose the dogs of war. And finally, the straw that broke the UK's back. UK news. David Cameron orders review of Muslim Brotherhood. Prime Minister David Cameron has commissioned a review of the Muslim Brotherhood's UK activity, Number 10 says. The Muslim Brotherhood is an Islamist movement which has been declared a terrorist group by Egypt's government. Recent press reports have suggested members have moved to London to escape a crackdown in Cairo, where the group backs ousted President Mohamed Morsi. Number 10 said the review would examine the group's philosophy and activities and the government's policy towards it. According to The Times, it was prompted by evidence received by the government that Muslim Brotherhood leaders met in London last year to plan their response to events in Egypt. The Prime Minister's official spokesman said that the main conclusions of the review, which is due to be completed by the summer, would be made public. Asked what had triggered the review, he said that the government had received a succession of reports from its embassies in the region, building up a picture which the PM believed should be examined. British leaders praise British Muslim achievements. At London's Grosvenor House Monday, Prime Minister David Cameron joined some 800 people to celebrate the 12th Muslim News Awards for Excellence, Britain's longest standing Muslim awards event. The coveted awards ceremony recognises the very best of Muslim contribution to British society. The guest of honour, Prime Minister David Cameron, presenting the Enterprise Award to Shabir Randery, Executive Chair of DCD Group, said, "I'm delighted to have taken part in this year's Muslim News Awards for Excellence, where we were able to champion and celebrate the huge contribution British Muslims make to our country. I was truly impressed hearing about the extraordinary work of the nominees and winners, and it was great to have been able to meet some of them tonight." In a message, opposition leader Ed Miliband said, "Tonight's awards ceremony is an opportunity to celebrate the great talent shown and contribution given by Muslim people in all walks of life. The awards recognise not only excellence in business, sport, arts and technology, but also those who have served their communities selflessly. It is a true celebration of values core to our country, of community and commitment, of education and learning." Nick Clegg, Deputy Prime Minister and leader of the Liberal Democrats, said, "The Muslim News Awards for Excellence has become the flagship event for Muslim communities in the UK, highlighting British Muslim contributions to society which might otherwise go unrecognised. The contribution of British Muslims to the country's rich multicultural landscape cannot be underestimated." World at 8. I think I am about to be very sick indeed. I have never heard so much rubbish in all my life. Talk about positive propaganda. This lot must have taken a bath in it or wallowed in it like shite. The true side of this is that during the last few thousand years, or rather since the year 800 whatever Anno Domini, there have been few true followers of Allah and Islam that have done anything other than kill, convert and breed. Most of the so-called great thinkers stole their thoughts from around them outside Islam, and the rest are lies. Look at the Nobel Prize list, mainly consisting of people of the Jewish faith. All the Muslims have done in the UK is to take over positions, votes, lands and businesses. In fact, what they do in every country, they immigrate to. 400,000 migrants on taxpayer-funded benefits. No wonder they flock to Britain. The growing popularity of Britain as a haven for economic migrants has been exposed in figures showing the lives of almost 400,000 foreign-born residents are funded by the taxpayer. New Home Office statistics reveal that 397,000 non-UK nationals received handouts in February 2013, a rise of nearly 110,000 from 288,720 in the 5 years since 2008. But the true number could be even greater, as details are not yet available for the past 12 months. World date. Oh dear, and here I was feeling bad because I'm part of the growing older generation that, according to the TV, ruins life in the UK for everyone. Well, I'm of the opinion I've paid into this country since I was 17 years old, so I'm entitled to be as big a bloody nuisance as I can, not some sodding foreigner. European news. NATO to beef up defences in Eastern Europe. NATO has given its senior military commander in Europe a mandate to beef up self-defence plans in Eastern European countries after Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimea region last month, alliance sources said Tuesday. The mandate includes deployment of air, naval and land forces, increasing response readiness levels, bolstering military exercises and possible deployment in the Baltic and Black Seas, which border on Russia. The mandate for all necessary means for the necessary length of time was issued at the start of a 2-day meeting of foreign ministers from the 28-member NATO bloc, which is convening for the first time since the Crimea takeover. Denmark, France, Germany, Poland, Portugal, the US and the UK have said they will contribute to this effort. In a meeting with acting Ukrainian Foreign Minister Andrei Deshaitsier, the NATO ministers also pledged to enact immediate and long-term measures to bolster Ukraine's self-defence capabilities. NATO ministers in their concluding statement said they do not recognise Russia's illegal and illegitimate attempt to annex Crimea. They urged Moscow to immediately act to return to respect for international law. Russia acted against the principles and commitment of its partnership with NATO, violating the trust on which that partnership was founded, the ministers said. The NATO allies also approved a packet of measures to strengthen ties with their East European partners, adding they will review their Russian partnership at the next summit to be held in June. Meanwhile, the NATO-Russia channel remains open to political dialogue at ambassador level and beyond, the alliance said. Ukraine crisis. Poland asked NATO to station 10,000 troops in its territory. Poland asked NATO to station 10,000 troops on its territory on Tuesday as a visible demonstration of the alliance's resolve to defend all its members after Russia's seizure of Crimea. NATO foreign ministers met in Brussels to consider requests for soldiers to be deployed in Poland and the Baltic states, all of which share borders with Russia. NATO generals and admirals have been ordered to devise ways to better protect alliance members that feel threatened by Russia and all practical civilian and military cooperation with Russia. President Vladimir Putin has massed about 40,000 troops near Ukraine's eastern frontier, giving himself the option of seizing more of his neighbour's territory. Denmark. Muslim gang attacks police in Muslim-dominated area. While Danish authorities are regularly attacked with what could one day turn out to be deadly force, Islamic authorities such as extremist imams, patrolling Muslim father groups and homemade Sharia courts are safe to exert their power in Europe's new Gaza strips. 2 members of the immigrant gang loyal to Familia were arrested Wednesday for a violent assault with heavy cobblestones against a police car from the Copenhagen police. The attack took place on the night between Saturday and Sunday at People's Park in Nordborough. As the uniformed patrol car drove by Stengade Saturday night, the 2 policemen in the car were suddenly bombarded with several large cobblestones of the size of 10 by 10 centimetres. The 4 cobblestones smashed the windshield and the side window, said Deputy Police Inspector Lau Thigsen from the Department of Organised Crime in Copenhagen Police. Neither of the 2 policemen in the car were injured in the cobblestone attack. However, there have previously been similar cases where colleagues were seriously injured, including a fractured skull, as the Deputy Police Inspector. World at 8. And it will continue until someone, somewhere, does something about it. Give an inch and see immigrants take a mile. More than 40% of Italians want to quit Euro. A new poll has found that more than 40% of Italians would like the country to leave the European single currency. World at 8. Can you blame them? I now hand you over to Austen Davies, who is discombobulated with the climate change industry.
I'd like to spend a few minutes talking about the weather. I mean, we are British after all, and that's what we do, isn't it? I woke up this morning to snow. Nasty cold stuff, albeit quite pretty, from the vantage point of a nice warm room anyway. It wasn't snowing last time this week, and nothing like as cold. So clearly, we are experiencing a period of global cooling, which will probably culminate in a new ice age. 99% of all life on Earth will become extinct, and we'll all have to emigrate to Africa, because that will be the only place warm enough to survive in. It would almost be worth it just to see the look on their faces. I said almost. What do you mean I'm talking drivel? Well, OK, I might be, but they started it. They being the shadowy twilight creatures who are running the climate change industry. And industry it is. Whether or not you subscribe to climate change, it is a fact, a reality. If you don't believe me, just ask the poor beggars down in Somerset, who are still mopping out their kitchens, having spent the last 3 years underwater. They'll tell you. They'll tell you that this has been the wettest winter since records began, which must mean the wettest winter ever. The wettest winter since the beginning of time, doesn't it? Well, it might if records actually began in the beginning, but they didn't. The Almighty had better things to do than to keep them, so those records only began in 1910, when the Met Office equivalent of the day thought it would be a good idea. The world, on the other hand, began a little earlier than that, or so I believe. The beautiful opening lines from John's Gospel tells us that, "In the beginning was the Word, that is Christ, and that he was with God, and that he was God, and that he was there with God before anything was created." So quite a bit before 1910 then. I love old things. The painting I keep in the hall that once belonged to Great Aunt Agatha, who was born way back in 1888. My lovely little occasional table that dates back to the 17th century, so that's very, very old indeed. But I've also got a little fossil that I dug out from a quarry in Martley in Worcestershire when I was 15, and that's 300 million years old. So it tends to redefine the word old somewhat. One of the problems associated with being human, and therefore mortal, is that we tend to think of time within the confines of our own earthly limitations. 30 years is a very long time, especially if you happen to be a train robber, and 70 years is an entire lifetime for some of us. So, given those limitations, what can we possibly know about the beginning? Well, for a start, we know that the beginning, for our Earth at least, happened about 8.5 billion years ago, because scientists have been able to date the age of the universe, pinpoint the date of creation, that Big Bang that nobody ever heard, but of which clever people speak all the time, with great authority, and we can work forward from that. But what can we do with a number like 8.5 billion, a number that is truly astronomical? OK, so the size of the national debt actually makes it pale into insignificance, but it's still quite a big number. As ever, when I come up against something that I can't get to grips with, I try to reduce it down to something that I can. So in order to put 8.5 billion years into a manageable context, I divided it by 31,536,000. And that means that 1 year lasts for only a second. 2 snaps of your fingers, that's a year gone. And now we can start to come to terms with what time really comprises. We can start to formulate a picture of the beginning. First, though, we should get used to this accelerated version of time and try to relate to it. in our year-in-a-second time scale, we can look forward to living about a minute and a half, so I'm afraid you carked it before I got to this point in my little talk. Had you hung on for another 10 seconds, you'd have got a telegram from the Queen. The Norman conquest took place a quarter of an hour ago, and Christ walked upon the earth a little more than half an hour ago. My fossil's 9 years old, by the way. And the beginning. In this Lilliputian dimension, where the climate change industry's start point of 1910 was less than 2 minutes ago, the real beginning was 270 years ago, because that's how long it takes 8.5 million seconds to tick by. 270 years. Is it any wonder we find infinity difficult to contemplate? But if in the beginning was the Word, then in the beginning was the Word and climate change. It was changing then, and it's been changing ever since. It's just that now they've found a way to tax it. When I was a boy, I remember the adults grumbling that they would tax the bloody weather next. Well, it's happened. We should be very careful what we make jokes of. And why do they tax it? They tax it because they can, and because it's very, very profitable, not to mention fashionable, to convince the populace that if we emit carbon dioxide, Satan will rise up in his glorious splendour and devour us all. So they effectively fine us for doing so. Now, if we keep in mind the fact that we take in oxygen and exhale carbon dioxide, we come to appreciate that it's not only the weather that's being taxed here. These bastards have finally managed to charge us for breathing. And it's no use telling them that just a few minutes ago on our abbreviated clock we were holding goose fairs on the frozen Thames, or that just a few hours ago the south of the country was a tropical swamp, because they already know. They're just banking on the fact that you don't, and that even if you do, you are stuck so fast to your sofa with a pizza in one hand and a can of lager in the other, living your surrogate life at number 27 Coronation Street, you won't do anything about it. Carbon dioxide is often called by its elemental name of CO2. That's 1 part carbon and 2 parts oxygen in every molecule. And to be perfectly honest, I don't know if it's good, bad or indifferent so far as any effect it has on our planet. But I do know that the United Kingdom is only responsible for 2% of what is produced by human activity worldwide, and that if UK plc shut down today, that is ceased to be completely, no one so much as breathing, the resultant savings of CO2 would have been cancelled out by increased Chinese activity by Christmas. One statistic routinely obscured by those who seek to confound us with carbon dioxide misinformation concerns the proportion of the stuff that worldwide man is actually responsible for. The very top end of scientific opinion puts it at no more than 3.5% of the whole, and the lower end considerably less than that. Old Mother Earth makes the rest of it, all on her little lonesome. Yet there is far more to the climate change industry than the current obscene levels of taxation, like the ugly, obtrusive and hopelessly inefficient wind turbines that blight our land, a blight that has cost every man, woman and child in this country £15,000 in subsidies alone. And our ruling classes are trousering vast amounts of cash for their part in that betrayal. Mr. Tim Yeo is chairman, temporarily suspended, of the Energy and Climate Change Select Committee. That just about makes him Mr. Wind Turbine, in a wholly impartial sort of way, of course. In 2012 he received a total of £135,970 from 3 companies, AFC Energy, EcoCity and TMO Renewables, and you win a carrot if you work out what they do. That pay was on top of his MP's salary of £65,738, plus expenses of course, plus it was on top of what he made from directorships of other companies that all seemed to have a leaning towards renewable energy, which is weasel speak for wind turbines. Mr. Yeo departs Parliament at the next general election because his constituency party have deselected him before they all died of shame. But Mr. Yeo isn't alone. There are dozens of influential noses in this particular trough, from John Gummer, whose political high point came when he forcibly fed his own children BSE burgers to prove that they were healthy and wholesome, to David Cameron's father-in-law, who is already fabulously wealthy, but it doesn't stop him being greedy, grasping, and determined to squeeze every possible penny out of the public purse, which might otherwise be squandered on fuel subsidies for the elderly or free school meals for kids whose mums had to choose between giving them breakfast and turning the heating on. And we have to stand for it. But only for now. Because forever is a very long time, even when a year passes in a second. Austen Davies, World at 8, neck deep in post-digestive bovine waste matter.
Thank you very much, Austen, for your input, and I agree with all of it. World news. US labels Hamza a terrorist leader of global reach. Prosecutors say hook-handed cleric sent lieutenants to jihad training camps. Hate preacher Abu Hamza has been dubbed a terrorist of global reach by the US government, who claim he sent lieutenants to terror camps worldwide. A decade after he was first arrested in Britain on a US warrant for terrorism charges, sparking an extraordinary extradition battle costing British taxpayers over £2 million, the hook-handed cleric is finally due to go on trial next month in New York, facing allegations that he controlled a global network of jihadists. World date. What a waste of money. Rope and sword. That is the Arabic way. Thought for the day. Let loose the dogs of war. Now, before I let loose my dogs of war, I want to say something that I hope my listeners will absorb. There are many things that require an open mind, and nationalism is one of them. We cannot deny that as nationalists we have our country's well-being at heart, if not all the people not of our tribes. This is natural for nationalists, and all the people in all the countries of the world who are of this mind are nationalists, and we all share this manifesto at heart, whether we like it or not. Now, as a nationalist, I can admire another person's nationalism and fire for their country of birth or even adoption. Whether I like that person or admire what they do or have done is entirely a matter for me on a personal level and my conscience. Thus, the EU, for example, is a misnomer. The United Nations is a misnomer, as is NATO. All these organisations are united, not by their love for their countries, but for their united hatred of other countries and their peoples. Friendships, diplomacy and corporate misdeeds litter their offices like so much carpet tiling, and just as fragile. One man's enemy today is his bosom buddy of tomorrow. That is the nature of everything political, and wars and invasions have always been about money and power, watered copiously by political ambitions. The shifting sands of politics quickly become the sandstorm of the next morning, which threatens to engulf everyone or country not holding the current opinion that has been muted. History is also written by the victors, and indeed modern warfare is not so much an ideal as a method of threatening and dividing countries who often do not deserve it. Many of the countries in modern history which have been temporarily demolished have been ruled by nationalists, whether they be communist or fascists or something in between. You have to be of a nationalistic mind to lead your country anyway. It is the natural order of things. It is the alpha male dog of war. People who don't care go into large corporations, arms selling and worse, and a large proportion of these self-serving retards do go into the political arena, but for their own sake, not that of their country. And these are the people who condemn and have condemned other countries and leaders, dead or alive, for their nationalistic stance. Nationalism is not appreciated on the world stage. It is crowded out by closed minds. However open they may be to corruption and lies, they are always closed to anything remotely nationalistic in any way, shape or form, country or leader, past or present. On the fact over who looses its dogs of war with the most frequency, this should say it all. What are the true facts? A study of war by Professor Quincy Wright shows that in the period from 1480 to 1940 there were 278 wars involving European countries whose percentage participation was as follows. England 28%, France 26%, Spain 23%, Russia 22%, Austria 19%, Turkey 15%, Poland 11%, Sweden 9%, Italy 9%, Netherlands 8%, Germany including Prussia 8%, Denmark 7%. Likewise, Peterium Sorokin, Volume 3, Part 2, Social and Cultural Dynamics, shows that from the 12th century to 1925, the percentage of years in which leading European powers have been at war is as follows. Country percentage of years at war: Spain 67, Poland 58, England 56, France 50, Russia 46, Holland 44, Italy 36, Germany 28. Sorokin concludes therefore that Germany has had the smallest and Spain the largest percent of years of war. Of leading modern European states, England, France and Russia show clearly twice the aggressive tendencies of Germany. We wonder why Germany is so strong now. Are you worried about this? After all the subliminal messages for the last 70 years over a country we, the Allies, divided and gave a goodly proportion over to communist Russia like a box of chocolates, whose last leader was the most popular leader in the Western world and whose followers didn't even flinch in loyalty over Operation Gomorrah, which allowed and encouraged 50 countries to continuously bomb day and night their capital Berlin, and in fact allowed the Russian carte blanche to hammer in the nails of their coffins. Why should we fear them? Well, with a history like that, even if the British had had that sort of war, although ours was no picnic, wouldn't you feel it rather nationalistically inclined? I would, and I'm not German and I'm not pro-Nazi. Angela Merkel looks to me like an agitated ferret, but she is clever insofar her name is never aligned with anything in Germany's past which is still being wrong-footed to a greater degree, as of course, whether we agreed with the Third Reich or not, it was a nationalistic party, and anti-communist, even though it was titled the Nationalist Socialist Workers' Party, and Hitler was distrustful of anyone who came from the old Prussian aristocracy. Now, I'm not going there with the Holocaust, the Jewish people, the anti-Zionists, the pro-Zionists, the great Jewish banksters, the Jewish filmmakers and all the millions made out of the sufferings of the Jews, whatever their true numbers, during those times. But as a nationalist you have to admire nationalism in other people, in other countries, and part of this is being fairly open-minded as to the way other nationalists behave and conduct their wars. Unfortunately, Germany, along with many other countries who have conducted invasions on neighbouring countries, is the prime target of negative propaganda, and indeed, even if one utters anything vaguely positive about Germany during the 1930s and 40s, you are immediately hailed as a pro-Nazi and a complete meathead. It is true that according to the British War Crimes Commission, no other soldier or politician from any of the Allies could be accused of war crimes, only the Germans. This of course allowed the Katyn massacre of 20,000 Polish officers to remain firmly at the door of the German troops, even during my youth when I first read about it. It also allowed the Russians free rein to torture and murder Germans wherever they found them, all of which is never mentioned, along with Stalin's own version of the killing fields, which claimed 20 million people. No wonder Germany is forerunner in organising through NATO massing troops on Russia's border with Crimea now. Paybacks are hell. Now I admire Putin as a true nationalist, whereas I did not admire Stalin, who was just an ignorant communist butcher. I admired Saddam even though at the time I thought, along with most propagandised Brits, that he did have weapons of mass destruction. But his treatment at the end in the hands of the US military was disgusting, and redolent of the Nuremberg trials, where it paid to be a scientist, not a soldier, at the end of that war. Nationalists come in all forms, all colours and all creeds. Where nationalism is dangerous is when it comes in the form of massive immigration into Europe, in the form of Islam. Why? These people are not nationalists and despise nationalism because they have no country. They have a religion and are religious fanatics to the man. They do not seek to better any country, they seek to overcome, outbreed and force submission on any and all countries they occupy. They are not wolves dressed as lambs, they are soldiers dressed as priests, and more dangerous than any nationalist leader has ever been. Let's see how our positive and negative propaganda machine works with the Muslims in the UK, and you will not be surprised at the rate at which Islam attaches itself like a giant leech to the powers that be. The New World Order, the School of Common Purpose, the Frankfurt School of Indoctrination and the government and media. It will be positives all the way around with the truth lurking in the background, the newish elephant in the room. True nationalism demands open minds and the acceptance that every country has nationalists that need to be admired. And finally, the straw that broke the UK's back. A British Navy destroyer stops 4 Muslims in a rowboat rowing towards Brighton. The captain gets on a loud haler and shouts, "Ahoy, small craft, where are you heading?" One of the Muslims stands up and shouts, "We're invading England." The crew of the destroyer all start laughing. And the crew of the destroyer all start laughing, and when the captain finally stops guffawing, he gets back on the loud haler and says, "Just the 4 of you?" The Muslim stands up again and shouts, "No, we're the last 4. The rest are already there." You've been listening to The World at 8. I am Lynn Mozart and I wish you all a very good night.